I never imagined that the cruelest words of my life would come from the mouth of my own granddaughter, the girl I raised with so much love and sacrifice. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where you all are. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 68 years old, and the day that should have been a simple family lunch turned into the beginning of my worst nightmare. It was a sunny Saturday in a quiet Ohio suburb, and my granddaughter Chloe, 23, was visiting. She had always been the apple of my eye, the one I dedicated every fiber of my being to since her parents moved abroad, leaving her in my care when she was just 5 years old. I raised her as my own daughter, making sure she had everything she needed and more. That morning, I had chosen my favorite dress, a vintage floral one that always made me feel elegant and had been a gift from my late husband for our lunch at my favorite restaurant, the Maple Tree Diner. Chloe, with her impeccable fashion sense, designer clothes, and an air of superiority that had grown in recent years, looked me up and down with a sneer. Her eyes, once full of affection, now seemed to judge every detail of my existence. "Grandma, are you really going out in that?" she asked, pointing at my dress with a finger adorned with expensive rings. "It looks like you pulled that out of a donation bin. They're old lady rags, frankly. Don't you have anything more presentable? Something that won't make me look like I'm with my great-grandmother?" Her words hit me like a slap. I felt my face flush and my eyes well up, not just from shame, but from deep disappointment. The humiliation was public, right there in my own living room, a space that had always been a refuge of love and acceptance. I tried to hide it, forcing a smile I could barely maintain, but the pain was palpable, a tight knot in my throat. "Oh, Chloe, it's a comfortable dress and I love it," I mumbled, feeling myself shrink under her critical gaze. She just rolled her eyes impatiently, grabbed the designer bag I had given her as a birthday gift, and said in a tone that bordered on disdain, "Whatever, Grandma. Just don't expect me to walk next to you at the mall dressed like that. People will think we're from different worlds." That comment, coming from my own granddaughter, to whom I had given everything, from ballet lessons to college, was a direct blow to my heart. Little did I know that this humiliation would be just the prelude to a much deeper and more devastating betrayal, one that would test the limits of my love and my capacity for forgiveness. That day, which began with the promise of a pleasant lunch, quickly turned into a landmark of pain and disillusionment, a dark omen of what was to come. Life was never easy for me, but I always found strength in my love for my family. After losing my husband early, I dedicated my life to raising my son and later my granddaughter, Chloe. I worked full-time as a nurse at St. Jude's Hospital in Cincinnati, and then took extra shifts at a private clinic to ensure Chloe had the best opportunities. I gave up trips, new hobbies, an active social life, all so she wouldn't feel her parents' absence. I remember sleepless nights, taking care of her when she was sick, cold mornings waiting for the school bus, and every graduation, every dance recital where I was the proudest grandmother in the audience. My savings, which I guarded so carefully, were the result of decades of hard work and sacrifice. They represented not only security for my old age, but also the promise of a future for Chloe. I had a special savings account, an emergency fund I called the Future Fund, where I kept money for any needs that might arise for her. It was for college, for a wedding, for a down payment on a house, anything that would help her have a better start in life than mine. Every dollar saved was a testament to my unconditional love. I trusted her blindly, shared my dreams and plans, and believed she valued everything I did. When she asked me for money for an urgent college project last month, I didn't hesitate. After all, it was for her future, and I always taught her to be independent and successful. She promised she would return it as soon as the project was approved and the investment money came back. Chloe had always been ambitious, but lately, that ambition seemed to have turned into something more, an incessant pursuit of material possessions and a luxurious lifestyle that I could barely keep up with. She constantly talked about the designer clothes she wanted, the expensive cars her friends had, and the exotic trips she dreamed of taking. I, on the other hand, lived a simple life, content with my small joys and the certainty that I had done my best for my family. That floral dress, which she called old lady rags, was a symbol of my simplicity and my attachment to memories, something she seemed to despise. That day, as she humiliated me for my appearance, I had a premonition, a feeling that something was terribly wrong, a dissonance between the granddaughter I loved and the young woman she had become. The humiliation at lunch was just the first blow. The real shock came a few days later, when I decided to check the future fund. I had a habit of checking my accounts online weekly, but with Chloe's visit and the weekend's hustle, I had put it off. That Tuesday, sitting at my kitchen table, with my chamomile tea and laptop open, I accessed the bank's website. My heart started beating faster as the page loaded. The balance wasn't right. It wasn't even close to what it should have been. My eyes scanned the numbers, disbelieving. Where were my $85,000? Where was the money I had saved for over 40 years? My hands trembled and the teacup slipped, spilling onto the table. It wasn't a mistake. It couldn't be. I checked the transactions one by one. There had been a series of large withdrawals, all made in the last 2 months. Withdrawals I hadn't authorized. Withdrawals that had almost completely emptied my savings fund. The chilling dread mentioned in the thumbnail text began to fill me. My mind, previously confused, began to connect the dots. Chloe's urgent college project, the request for money, her insistence that I make the transfer online, saying it was faster and she would help me with the steps. I, naive, had given her access to my account, trusting her completely. The pain of betrayal was overwhelming, much worse than any humiliation. It wasn't just the money, it was the breach of trust, the feeling of having been used by the person I loved and trusted most, my own flesh and blood. I felt a lump in my throat, and tears began to roll uncontrollably down my face. How could she? How could my sweet Chloe, the girl I had taught about honesty and integrity, do something so cruel? The image of her, with that sneering smile, calling my clothes old lady rags, came back to my mind. That wasn't just disrespect. It was a symptom of something much darker. The house, once a refuge, now seemed cold and empty. Every object, every memory of Chloe seemed to mock my naivety. I knew deep in my heart that she was involved. The evidence was clear, but acceptance was almost impossible. The pain of a grandmother turned into fierce determination. I couldn't let this go. Not for me, but for the years of sacrifice, for every dollar saved, and for the dignity she tried to steal from me. I needed answers, and she would give them. Chloe's denial, so cold and calculating, only solidified my resolve. I could no longer afford to be the naive grandmother. I needed proof, concrete facts to confront her with. I started rummaging through my documents, every bank statement, every email. I remembered the day Chloe asked me to make the transfer for the project. She had guided me step by step through the online process, making sure I typed in the password and security code. At the time, it seemed like a helpful gesture. Now, it was clear manipulation. As I searched, I found an old email from the bank, alerting me about an unknown device login attempt, which I had ignored. The date coincided with one of the withdrawals. Furthermore, I started noticing patterns. Chloe, who used to live on a tight budget, was suddenly flaunting new designer clothes, dining at expensive restaurants in downtown Los Angeles, where she lived now, and even posting photos of a weekend trip to Miami on her social media. All of this, in the weeks following the withdrawals from my account. The puzzle pieces began to fit together in a terrifying way. With each new discovery, my heart tightened. It was my granddaughter, the girl I had cradled, read stories to, and taught to walk. The idea that she could be so cruel and manipulative was almost unbearable. But the evidence was undeniable. I felt like a detective in my own home, unraveling a web of betrayal that had stretched for months. The pain was constant, a weight on my chest that prevented me from taking a deep breath. However, with every tear that fell, my determination grew. I wasn't doing this for revenge, but for principle, for all the years of sacrifice, for every dollar saved, and for the dignity she tried to steal from me. I needed her to understand the gravity of her actions, not just for me, but for herself. With the folder full of bank statements, emails, and Chloe's social media photos, I made the hardest decision of my life. I went to the local police station, the same one where my late husband, a retired police officer, had worked for years. Sergeant Miller, a kind man who had known my family for decades, greeted me with a concerned look. "Eleanor, what can I do for you?" My voice faltered as I began to tell the story, the humiliation, the discovery of the withdrawals, the confrontation, and Chloe's denial. He listened patiently, his eyes narrowing with each detail. When I finished, he took the folder and began to examine the documents. "This is serious, Eleanor, very serious. Fraud, theft, and by a family member. It's always more complicated." He made some notes, and I could feel the weight of the situation. "We need a formal investigation. That means we'll have to confront Chloe with this evidence, and she will be interrogated." The thought of seeing my granddaughter under police interrogation turned my stomach, but I knew there was no other way. Sergeant Miller explained the next steps. They would contact the bank to verify the transactions and the Los Angeles police to locate Chloe. The wheels of justice were beginning to turn, and I was the one who had set them in motion. I went home with a strange mix of relief and dread. The relief of finally having acted, of having taken the first step to reverse the situation. The dread of what was to come, of the inevitable confrontation, of public exposure, and of the possibility that my granddaughter, whom I loved despite everything, would face the legal consequences of her actions. A grandmother's pain mingled with the determination of a woman who would not bow to injustice. I had planted the seeds of truth, and now the harvest, however bitter, was about to begin. The interrogation room was silent for a long minute. Chloe was huddled in the chair, tears streaming down her face, but they were not tears of remorse, but of defeat. Sergeant Miller, realizing that denial would lead nowhere, asked the final question. "Ms. Vance, do you have anything to declare regarding the accusations of fraud and theft against your grandmother, Eleanor Vance?" Chloe looked up, her eyes red and swollen, and mumbled something inaudible. "I didn't hear you, ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice grave. "You are accused of a serious crime. Your grandmother has all the evidence." It was then that Chloe exploded. "She has plenty of money. She doesn't need anything. I just wanted the life I deserve, the life she promised me." The confession, though distorted by anger and self-justification, was clear. She had stolen. The pain in my chest intensified, but the determination to see justice done remained unwavering. Sergeant Miller nodded to the other two officers. "Ms. Vance, you are under arrest for fraud and theft. Anything you say can and will be used against you in court." The officers approached Chloe. She tried to resist, screaming and struggling, but they restrained her firmly. "No, you can't do this. I'm innocent. Grandma, please help me," she pleaded, looking directly at the camera, at me. But I couldn't. Not anymore. The girl I had loved unconditionally had turned into a stranger, consumed by greed and ingratitude. The scene was brutal, but necessary. I saw through the screen the officers put handcuffs on her wrists. Chloe continued to scream, cry, and thrash, but her words became unintelligible. She was led out of the interrogation room, her screams echoing in the background. Sergeant Miller looked at the camera and said, "Eleanor, justice is being served." I ended the video call, my heart heavy, but with a feeling that finally the cycle of pain and betrayal was being broken. The grandmother she had humiliated and robbed had prevailed. She was dragged away by the police. The silence that followed Chloe's arrest was deafening. There was no joy, only a deep emptiness. Justice had been served, but at an immense cost. My granddaughter, the girl I had raised, was facing the consequences of her choices, and I, the grandmother who loved her, was responsible for it. In the days that followed, the news spread like wildfire. Family, friends, everyone was shocked. Some supported me, others judged me, but the truth is that no one could understand the complexity of the pain I felt. The legal process was long and painful. Chloe was formally charged, and after the presentation of irrefutable evidence, she pleaded guilty in a plea bargain to reduce her sentence. She was sentenced to a period of probation with the obligation to repay the stolen amount and perform community service. The judge, in his sentence, emphasized the breach of trust and the manipulation of an elderly person, but also acknowledged the lack of a criminal record and the possibility of rehabilitation. I did not go to court. I couldn't. The image of her being taken away by the police was enough. The money was eventually returned, but the future fund would never be the same, not just because of the numbers, but because of what it represented: innocence, trust, the promise of a carefree future. I learned a hard lesson about the limits of love and sacrifice. I learned that no matter how much we love someone, we cannot allow that love to be exploited and dignity to be trampled. That floral dress, which Chloe called old lady rags, was now a constant reminder of my resilience. I wore it the day I received the restitution notification, not as an act of revenge, but as a symbol of overcoming. Today, my life is different. I reconnected with old friends, started painting classes, something I always wanted to do. My house, once full of painful memories, is now a place of peace and new beginnings. I no longer have contact with Chloe. She sent me a letter written by her lawyer, expressing superficial regret, but I knew that true regret would come with time, if it ever did. The wound is still there, but it's healing. The pain of betrayal taught me the value of my own strength. I am not just a grandmother. I am Eleanor Vance, a woman who, even in old age, found the courage to fight for herself and her dignity. And that is the most valuable lesson of all.